My name is Clara Vance. I'm 34 years old, and for 10 years, I believed I was married to the most devoted man in Seattle. But on a rainy Tuesday evening, during an intimate dinner party I spent 2 days cooking for, my husband walked through the front door with a weeping, beautiful woman he introduced as a grieving widow, only for my 7-year-old daughter to tug on my sleeve and whisper, "Mommy, that's her. That's the lady from Daddy's secret phone." Before I tell you how I dismantled his entire life brick by brick, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now as you listen to this. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the foundation of a marriage that looked like a magazine spread but was actually a crime scene. Julian and I met in architecture school. He was the charismatic visionary, the guy who could talk a professor into extending a deadline just by smiling. I was the quiet one, the one with the eye for structural integrity and interior flow. We were supposed to be a team. When we graduated, we started Vance and Associates. We used my grandmother's inheritance, $75,000, to lease our first office space and buy the drafting tables. But somehow, over the span of a decade, Vance and Associates became just Julian. He was the face, the principal architect, the one giving keynote speeches at urban development conferences. I was relegated to the background, handling payroll, picking out finishes, and eventually staying home to raise our daughter, Lily. Julian convinced me it was temporary. Once the firm hits its first million in revenue, Clara, we'll hire a full-time operations manager, and you can get back to designing, he promised, kissing my forehead. I believed him. I believed him when the firm hit 1 million, then 2 million, and he said it just wasn't the right time to disrupt the dynamic. I believed him when he started taking late-night meetings, claiming that high-end residential clients only had time to talk after their own workdays ended. I believed him when he changed his phone passcode, saying he was handling a high-security corporate contract and the NDA required strict device management. That's the thing about gaslighting. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a sudden blackout. It's a slow dimming of the lights. You adjust to the dark so gradually you forget what noon looks like. Julian was a master of the slow dim. If I asked why he smelled faintly of vanilla and amber, a perfume I never wore, he would look at me with such genuine, tender concern and say, "Clara, I was in a crowded elevator at the Thompson Hotel. Are you feeling okay? You've been so anxious lately." He would pour me a glass of wine, run a bath for me, and make me feel like I was losing my mind while simultaneously proving how much he loved me. By the fall of last year, we had settled into a comfortable, wealthy illusion. We lived in a 4-bedroom modern colonial in Mercer Island. Lily was thriving in first grade. Julian was negotiating a buyout of a smaller firm to expand Vance and Associates into commercial real estate. Everything was perfect. Everything was a lie. It started unraveling in November. Julian called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice was thick with performative empathy. "Clara, you know my new client, Marcus Cross, the one backing the Bellevue project?" "Yes," I said, wiping down the kitchen counter. "The developer. Marcus passed away last night. Massive heart attack," Julian sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound. "It's a tragedy. He leaves behind his wife, Evelyn. She's completely devastated, and she knows no one in the city. They just moved here from Chicago. I told her we were hosting a small dinner party tonight for the firm's partners, and I insisted she come. She needs a support system right now." I didn't hesitate. I am, at my core, a caretaker. "Of course, Julian. That's horrible. Tell her we'd love to have her. I'll make up the guest room just in case she needs to stay." I spent the next 5 hours preparing. I roasted a rack of lamb, prepared a pomegranate reduction, and set the dining room table with the good crystal. I wanted this grieving woman to feel a warm embrace the moment she walked into our home. The firm's partners, David and Sarah, arrived first. We were sipping Pinot Noir in the living room when the front door opened. Julian walked in first, taking off his trench coat. Then, she stepped into the foyer. Evelyn Cross did not look like a woman who had just lost the love of her life. She was breathtaking in a sharp, calculated way, ash blonde hair perfectly blown out, wearing a simple but immaculately tailored black cashmere dress. Her eyes were dry. She clutched a designer handbag that cost more than my first car. But the detail that hit me first, before a single word was spoken, was the scent. As she walked toward me, the air shifted, carrying the heavy, distinct notes of vanilla and amber. "The elevator perfume, Clara," Julian said, his hand resting gently, almost imperceptibly, on the small of Evelyn's back. "This is Evelyn. Evelyn, my wife, Clara. I'm so incredibly sorry for your loss, I said, stepping forward to hug her. She stiffened, allowing the embrace for a fraction of a second before pulling away. Thank you, she said. Her voice was raspy, smooth. Julian has been such a rock for me. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at him, and the look they exchanged a microscopic drop of the eyelids. A subtle softening of the jaw was a language I had spent 10 years learning. It was the language of intimacy. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was being paranoid. The woman's husband had just died. I was projecting my own insecurities. I smiled, took her coat, and ushered everyone into the dining room. The dinner was agonizing. Evelyn sat directly across from Julian, and I sat at the head of the table. David and Sarah offered their condolences, but within 20 minutes, the conversation shifted to the Bellevue project. Marcus Cross had been the primary investor. It's what Marcus would have wanted, Evelyn said, swirling her wine, for the project to continue, and I know Julian is the only architect who can see his vision through. She reached across the table. Her manicured fingers grazed Julian's hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just offered a solemn nod. It was right then that my daughter, Lily, padded into the dining room. She was supposed to be asleep, but she was clutching her stuffed rabbit, wearing her pink pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, I need water," she mumbled. I immediately stood up, grateful for the distraction. "Come here, sweetie. Let's get you a glass." Lily walked toward me, but she stopped halfway. She froze, staring across the table at Evelyn. Evelyn smiled at her, a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, who is this little angel?" Evelyn asked. Lily didn't answer her. Instead, she hurried over to my chair, grabbed the fabric of my silk blouse, pulled me down to her level, and cupped her hand over my ear. Her breath was warm against my skin. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "That's her." My heart stalled. "Who, baby?" I whispered back. "The lady from Daddy's secret phone. The one he talks to in the garage when you're sleeping." The world tilted. The dining room, with its ambient lighting and expensive crystal, suddenly felt like a centrifuge spinning out of control. I felt the blood drain from my face, rushing straight to my feet. A cold, sharp ringing echoed in my ears. Daddy's secret phone. I looked at Lily. Her wide, innocent eyes held no malice, just the simple confusion of a child recognizing a face she had seen on a glowing screen in the dark. I looked up. Julian was watching me. His expression was perfectly neutral, but his posture was rigid. He was waiting for my reaction. He was waiting for the hysterical wife to make a scene, to embarrass him in front of his partners, to give him the ammunition he needed to call me crazy. In that fraction of a second, 34 years of my life crystallized. Every cancelled dinner, every late night, every time he made me feel like my intuition was a symptom of anxiety, the vanilla and amber perfume, the Chicago investor who conveniently moved to Seattle. If I screamed now, I would lose. I had no proof, no access to his finances, no knowledge of the secret phone. If I threw my wine in her face, I would be the unhinged wife attacking a grieving widow. Julian would win the narrative. He always won the narrative. So, I did something that scared even me. I smiled. I stood up, holding Lily's hand, and looked directly into Evelyn's eyes. "She just recognizes you from the firm's brochure," I lied smoothly. "Julian shows her the client profiles. Come on, Lily. Let's get that water." I turned my back on them and walked into the kitchen. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I poured a glass of water, handed it to my daughter, and kissed her forehead. "Good girl, Lily," I whispered. "But let's keep this a secret between you and me, okay? It's a game." She nodded solemnly and padded back upstairs. I stood in the kitchen alone for a full minute, listening to the muffled laughter and clinking glasses from the dining room. My husband was entertaining his mistress in the house I decorated, drinking the wine I bought, mourning a man whose money they were probably planning to steal. I took a deep breath, smoothed my blouse, and walked back out there to serve dessert. Because I didn't want a scene. I wanted an execution. I served the blackberry tart with a dollop of vanilla bean mascarpone, moving around the table like a ghost. I poured the coffee. I smiled at David's jokes. I watched Julian lean across the mahogany table, the table I had painstakingly restored by hand 5 years ago to refill Evelyn's wine glass. Their knuckles brushed, a millimeter of contact that, to anyone else, would have looked like an accident. To me, it was a screaming siren. "Clara, this tart is phenomenal," Julian said, looking up at me with those warm, espresso-colored eyes that had anchored my entire adult life. You truly outdid yourself tonight. Evelyn, didn't I tell you? She's a magician in the kitchen. You did, Evelyn murmured, taking a delicate bite. She finally met my gaze. Julian speaks so highly of you. It must be wonderful to have so much free time to perfect these recipes. There it was, the subtle, silken insult, the dismissal of my entire existence. She didn't see an architect. She didn't see the woman who financed the very firm that paid for the wine she was currently drinking. She saw a domestic servant. It's a labor of love, I replied, my voice coated in a honeyed sweetness that tasted like ash in my mouth. But Julian is right. I do like to perfect things. I have a very low tolerance for messes. Julian chuckled, oblivious to the razor blade hidden in my words. By midnight, the guests had cleared out. David and Sarah hugged me goodbye, completely unaware that they had just attended the funeral of my marriage. Julian walked Evelyn to her Uber. I stood by the bay window in the living room, hidden behind the heavy linen drapes, watching them on the rain-slicked driveway. He didn't kiss her. He was too smart for that. But as he opened the car door for her, he pressed his hand against her cheek, a lingering, desperate touch, a touch he hadn't given me in years. When he came back inside, I was at the sink, washing the crystal goblets. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of Seattle rain against the glass. Julian walked up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, pressing his face into the crook of my neck. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and her. You were amazing tonight, he whispered, kissing my shoulder. Thank you for doing this. Evelyn really needed it. She's so broken right now. I closed my eyes. The urge to turn around and plunge the soapy chef's knife into his chest was so visceral it frightened me. But anger is a sloppy emotion. Anger makes you scream, throw things, and demand answers from a liar who will only feed you more lies. I didn't want anger. I wanted absolute, surgical precision. Of course, I said, keeping my voice soft, pliant. Anything for you. He went up to bed. I stayed downstairs for another hour, meticulously cleaning the kitchen until it looked like a sterile operating room. I waited until I heard the distinct, heavy rhythm of his snoring through the ceiling. Only then did I dry my hands and walk toward the door leading to the garage. The garage was Julian's sanctuary. It was where he kept his vintage Porsche, his golf clubs, and his drafting archives. If he had a secret phone, and he used it while I was sleeping, it was in here. The air inside was frigid, smelling of motor oil and damp cedar. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I used a small pen light I kept in the utility drawer, casting a narrow, trembling beam into the darkness. Where would a man who builds hidden compartments into luxury mansions hide a phone? I started with the obvious. The glove box of the Porsche, empty. His golf bag, nothing but tees and spare gloves. The tool chest. I sifted through wrenches and screwdrivers, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every creak of the house settling made me freeze, terrified he had woken up and noticed my empty side of the bed. Then I looked at his architectural archives. In the corner of the garage stood a towering rack of thick, cylindrical drafting tubes. They held the old, hand-drawn blueprints from the early days of Vance and Associates, the days when we worked side by side. I walked over to the rack. Most of the tubes were covered in a thin layer of dust, but one, located right at eye level, was perfectly clean. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pulled the black plastic cap off the tube. I tipped it downward. A sleek, black iPhone slid out, falling into my palm with a heavy, damning thud. I stared at the blank screen, my breath turning to vapor in the cold air. Lily was right. My sweet, observant 7-year-old had seen her father pacing out here in the dark, bathed in the glow of a device that didn't exist in our daily lives. I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated, blindingly bright, demanding a 6-digit passcode. My mind raced. Julian was a narcissist, but he wasn't careless. It wouldn't be his birthday, or Lily's, or our anniversary. It wouldn't be Evelyn's birthday either. That was too risky. I closed my eyes and thought about his habits. Julian had a physical tell when he was thinking. He would trace shapes on the kitchen counter with his index finger. For the past 6 months, I had watched him trace the same pattern over and over again, while staring blankly into his coffee. Hexagon. 6 points. I looked at the keypad. If you traced a hexagon on the number grid, starting from the top right, 3, 2, 4, 7, 8, 9. I held my breath and typed the numbers. Click. The phone unlocked. I sank onto a wooden stool in the corner of the garage. The penlight clamped between my teeth and opened the messaging app. There was only one contact saved, The name was simply Project E. I opened the thread. I expected to find the usual, sickening cliches of a sordid affair. I miss you. I want you. She doesn't understand me like you do. What I found was infinitely worse. Yes, the physical betrayal was there. There were photos taken in hotel rooms I recognized from his business trips, photos taken in our own bed. During the weekend, Lily and I had gone to visit my mother in Portland. My stomach convulsed, bile rising in my throat as I stared at the timestamps. He had brought her into the bed where I slept. But as I scrolled back weeks, then months, the messages shifted from romance to logistics. They weren't just sleeping together, they were building an empire. Evelyn, Marcus finalized the transfer today. The Bellevue funds are sitting in the joint account. He has no idea. Julian, good. As soon as the offshore LLC clears, wire the initial $3 million. I've already set up the dummy invoices through Vance & Associates to make it look like legitimate consulting fees. Evelyn, are you sure Clara won't notice the books? Julian, Clara doesn't look at the books anymore. She's too busy baking and playing housewife. She signs whatever I put in front of her. She's completely blind. A single, hot tear traced its way down my freezing cheek. Completely blind. I kept scrolling. The timeline of Marcus Cross's death suddenly took on a sinister, chilling context. Marcus hadn't just died. He had died right after authorizing a massive liquidation of his assets to fund the Bellevue project. And those assets weren't going to the project. Julian and Evelyn were siphoning the money through Vance & Associates into a shell company they jointly owned in the Cayman Islands. Then, I found the message that made the blood in my veins turn to ice water. It was dated 3 days ago. Evelyn, what happens to Clara when we pull the plug? The firm's debt is going to skyrocket once the Bellevue investors realize the money is gone. Julian, Clara is listed as the primary guarantor on the firm's line of credit. When we file for bankruptcy, the banks will go after her personal assets. The house, her savings, everything. It's the perfect scapegoat. By the time the auditors untangle the mess, we'll be in St. Bart's, and she'll be facing fraud charges. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the concrete floor. I pressed my hands over my mouth to muffle the raw, animalistic sound tearing up my throat. He wasn't just leaving me. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was framing me. The man who had held my hand in the delivery room, the man who had promised to protect me, was meticulously planning to send me to federal prison so he could fund a tropical getaway with a woman he introduced to me as a grieving widow. My name was on the line of credit. I remembered signing the documents 2 years ago. Julian had told me it was just a formality to secure better interest rates. Because I was the original founder with pristine credit, the bank required my signature. I had signed my own financial death warrant on the kitchen island, while Julian kissed my neck and poured me coffee. I sat in the freezing garage for 20 minutes, staring at the concrete wall. The Clara who had roasted a rack of lamb 4 hours ago was dead. The Clara who believed in love, in teamwork, in the sanctity of a decade-long marriage, had been suffocated in this dark, oily room. What rose from her ashes was something entirely different. Something cold, mathematical, and incredibly dangerous. I picked up the phone. I didn't delete anything. I didn't take screenshots and risk them uploading to his iCloud. Instead, I pulled my own phone from my pocket and spent the next hour photographing every single message, every bank routing number, every damning photograph on that screen. I documented the entire conspiracy. When I was finished, I locked the burner phone, wiped my fingerprints off the screen with the hem of my sweater, slid it back into the drafting tube, and replaced the cap exactly as I had found it. I walked back into the house. I climbed the stairs. I stripped off my clothes, slipped into bed beside the man who was actively plotting my destruction, and I matched my breathing to his. I laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the warmth of his body radiating against my back. He thought I was a blind, docile housewife. He thought my grandmother's $75,000 had bought him an empire, and my signature had bought him an escape hatch. He forgot one crucial detail. I was an architect too, and I knew exactly how to find the stress points in a structure. I knew exactly which beams to kick out to bring the whole house crashing down. The next morning, the Seattle sky was the color of a bruised plum. I stood at the kitchen island, frying eggs and buttering toast, functioning purely on adrenaline and a cold, vibrating rage. Julian came downstairs at 7 a.m., looking crisp and energized in a bespoke navy suit. He kissed the top of my head, poured his coffee, and checked his emails. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, not looking up from his screen. "Like the dead," I replied, placing a plate of eggs in front of him. He chuckled. Good. You worked hard yesterday. The dinner was a triumph. Evelyn texted me this morning she was incredibly grateful for your hospitality. I'm glad, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. She seems like a woman who knows exactly what she wants. Julian paused, a forkful of eggs hovering near his mouth. He glanced at me, a brief, assessing look, searching for any hidden meaning. I just smiled, pouring myself a cup of black coffee, the picture of domestic tranquility. He relaxed, satisfied that I was still safely confined within the parameters of the reality he had constructed. I have a long day, he said, standing up and adjusting his tie. Back-to-back meetings regarding the Bellevue site. I probably won't be home until late. Don't work too hard, I murmured. As soon as his Porsche pulled out of the driveway, I mobilized. I dropped Lily off at school, kissing her cheek and telling her Mommy loved her very much. Then, instead of going to the yoga class Julian assumed I attended every Wednesday, I drove straight to downtown Seattle. My first stop was not a lawyer. A lawyer would immediately file motions, triggering alerts, tipping Julian off that I knew. I needed someone who operated outside the sterile confines of family court. I needed someone who understood the dark, tangled arteries of corporate finance. I went to see Arthur Vance. Arthur was Julian's uncle, his father's older brother. He was also a retired forensic accountant who had spent 30 years dismantling embezzlement rings for the IRS. Julian despised him. Arthur had always seen through Julian's charm, recognizing the ruthless ambition underneath. Consequently, Julian had alienated him from the family years ago. Arthur lived in a modest, cluttered condo overlooking Elliott Bay. When he opened the door, his bushy gray eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Clara," he said, his voice gravelly, "I haven't seen you since the wedding. Julian finally let you off the leash?" "Julian doesn't know I'm here, Arthur, and if you give me 30 minutes, I'll show you why he never will." I sat at Arthur's dining table, pushed aside stacks of dusty hardcovers, and laid my phone down. I pulled up the photographs I had taken in the garage, the texts, the routing numbers, the offshore LLC documents Julian and Evelyn had photographed and sent to each other. Arthur put on his reading glasses. He didn't speak for a long time. He scrolled, his face impassive, but I saw the tightening of his jaw, the subtle narrowing of his eyes, as he traced the financial web Julian had spun. When he finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "My brother raised a sociopath," he said quietly. "I always suspected Julian was cutting corners. But this is federal wire fraud. Clara, they are laundering Marcus Cross's estate through your firm, and they've set you up to take the fall when the SEC inevitably comes knocking." "I know," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I need to know how to stop the transfer and how to redirect the blast radius back onto him." Arthur leaned forward, tapping his finger against the table. "Julian thinks he's clever. He's using Vance and Associates as a pass-through entity. The money from Cross's estate comes into the firm's operating account under the guise of consulting fees, and then he wires it to the Cayman LLC. But there's a vulnerability in his system." "What is it?" "You," Arthur said, looking me dead in the eye. "You are still listed as a founding partner, Clara. You're the primary guarantor. You have equal, unmitigated access to the firm's banking infrastructure. He hasn't removed your administrative privileges because doing so would have required your signature and tipped you off." I blinked, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Julian's arrogance was his Achilles heel. He was so confident in my blindness, so convinced I was completely detached from the business, that he had left the front door wide open. "The major transfer," Arthur continued, pointing to a photograph of a text message dated yesterday. "Evelyn is wiring $3 million into the Vance and Associates operating account this Friday at 10 a.m. Julian plans to bounce it immediately to the Caymans by noon." "So, what do we do?" I asked, my heart beginning to race with the thrill of impending sabotage. Arthur smiled, a sharp, wolfish grin that looked entirely out of place on an elderly accountant. "We don't stop the transfer, Clara. We intercept it. For the next 3 hours, Arthur and I built a financial guillotine. Using my credentials as founding partner, Arthur guided me through the labyrinth of the firm's banking portal. We didn't change passwords or trigger alerts. Instead, we set up an automated internal routing rule. When the $3 million from Evelyn Cross hit the firm's account on Friday at 10 a.m., it wouldn't sit there waiting for Julian to wire it offshore. Instead, the automated rule would instantaneously sweep the entire amount, along with every single dollar of Julian's accumulated profits currently sitting in the firm's reserve account, into a newly created, highly secure escrow account managed by a neutral third-party trust, an account that required 2 signatures to release funds, mine, and a federally appointed auditor's. Julian will try to execute his Cayman wire at noon, Arthur explained, typing furiously on his laptop. He'll log in, and he'll find an account balance of 0. The money will be legally frozen. He won't be able to move it. He won't be able to access his own profits. And he won't be able to pay the firm's immediate operating debts. And the fraud charges? I asked. How do I protect myself from the line of credit? That's the beauty of the escrow account, Arthur said, handing me a stack of printed documents. By proactively freezing the suspicious funds and immediately filing this report with the SEC, which I will submit on your behalf, the second the money hits the escrow, you are legally classified as a whistleblower. You aren't the perpetrator, Clara. You're the hero who caught the anomaly. Julian's plan to frame you will evaporate. I looked at the documents. The weight of what I was about to do settled heavily on my shoulders. I was dismantling the company I helped build. I was plunging my husband into a federal investigation. I was destroying the comfortable, affluent life Lily and I had known. But as I looked at Arthur's dining room wall, I saw a reflection of myself in a framed mirror. I looked tired. I looked diminished. For 10 years, I had shrunk myself to fit into Julian's shadow. I had allowed him to reduce me to a prop in his grand, narcissistic play. I picked up the pen and signed the whistleblower documents. Thank you, Arthur, I said. Don't thank me yet, he warned, his tone turning grave. When Julian realizes the money is gone, he is going to panic. He will be desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable. You cannot be in that house on Friday. I won't be, I promised. The next 48 hours were an agonizing exercise in psychological endurance. I had to inhabit the skin of the oblivious wife, while my entire nervous system screamed with the tension of a drawn bowstring. On Thursday evening, Julian was in high spirits. He brought home a bouquet of white peonies, my favorite, and poured us both glasses of expensive Bordeaux. He was vibrating with the anticipatory high of a man about to pull off the ultimate heist. I booked us a weekend trip to Whistler next month, he said, swirling his wine, looking at me with those lying, beautiful eyes. Just you and me, Clara. We need to reconnect. The Bellevue project is finally wrapping up, and I want to celebrate. He was buying time. He needed me docile and distracted, while the offshore transfer cleared and the bankruptcy dominoes began to fall. That sounds wonderful, Julian, I said, taking the peonies and burying my face in the soft petals to hide my expression. I can't wait. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I packed a single medium-sized suitcase. I packed Lily's favorite clothes, her stuffed rabbit, and our essential documents. I hid the suitcase in the trunk of my SUV, buried under a pile of reusable grocery bags. I didn't take any of the jewelry he bought me. I didn't take the expensive clothes. I only took what was mine before he consumed me. Friday morning arrived with a cold, biting wind sweeping off the Puget Sound. Julian left the house at 8 a.m. He kissed me deeply, a lingering, possessive kiss. Big day today, he whispered against my lips. I love you, Clara. I know, I replied. I didn't say it back. He didn't notice. At 8:30 a.m., I drove Lily to school. I walked her to her classroom, knelt down, and zipped up her jacket. Mommy is going to pick you up a little early today, okay? I told her, smoothing her hair. We're going to go on a surprise trip to see Grandma in Portland. Her face lit up. Really? Can we go to the zoo? We can do whatever you want, baby, I promised, fighting the tears burning the backs of my eyes. I drove back to the empty house in Mercer Island. It was 9:15 a.m. I had 45 minutes before the financial guillotine dropped. I walked through the rooms, the silent, meticulously decorated spaces that had been my entire world. The Moroccan rugs, the custom built-ins, the gallery wall of family photos. It all felt like a stage set now, hollow and meaningless. I went to the dining room table. I pulled out a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the same cardstock I used to print the menus for his dinner parties, and I wrote a single, brief letter. I left it precisely in the center of the mahogany table, right where Evelyn had sat 3 nights ago. At 9:55 a.m., I sat in my SUV in the driveway, the engine running, my phone resting on the center console. I had Arthur on a secure, encrypted line. Are you ready, Clara? Arthur asked, his voice crackling slightly. I'm ready. We watched the clock on the dashboard. 9:58, 9:59. Pulunor AM. The wire from Evelyn Cross just hit the Vance & Associates operating account, Arthur announced, his voice tight with concentration. $3.2 million. My breath hitched. The automated sweep is engaging, Arthur continued, typing rapidly. Transferring the $3.2 million. plus the firm's reserve balance of $800,000, into the secure escrow trust, executing now. A heavy, profound silence stretched over the phone line. The seconds felt like hours. I watched a neighbor walk their golden retriever past my driveway, completely unaware that a corporate empire was currently being vaporized in the digital ether. "Done," Arthur said, exhaling sharply. "The operating account is at zero. The escrow is locked. The whistleblower report has been successfully transmitted to the SEC Seattle field office." A cold, electric shockwave ripped through my body. It was done. The money was trapped. Julian's escape route was destroyed, and the authorities were already reviewing the evidence of his fraud. "Get out of there, Clara," Arthur urged. "He's going to check that account at noon. Drive." "Thank you, Arthur," I whispered. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the neighborhood without looking back. I picked Lily up from school, told the administration we had a sudden family emergency, and merged onto I-5 South, heading toward Portland. I drove for 2 hours in relative silence, listening to Lily hum to herself in the back seat. The tension in my shoulders began to unspool, replaced by a strange, hollow lightness. I had detonated the bomb, and now I was just waiting for the shockwave to hit. It hit at exactly 12:14 p.m. My phone, resting in the cup holder, erupted. The screen flashed violently. Julian calling. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. Julian calling. I let it ring a second time. Then a text message came through. "Clara, where are you? Why is the operating account empty? Did the bank call you? Answer the phone." He was panicking. The facade was cracking. The brilliant, unflappable Julian Vance was currently staring at a computer screen showing a zero balance, realizing that his Cayman's wire had bounced, his reserves were gone, and he had no way to explain it to his grieving, fraudulent mistress. I pulled off the highway at a rest stop near Olympia. I turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and finally answered the phone on the 5th ring. "Clara!" Julian roared into the receiver. His voice was unrecognizable, shrill, frantic, completely devoid of his usual baritone charm. "Where the hell are you? Something is wrong with the bank. The firm's money is gone. All of it. Did you authorize a transfer?" "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. He stopped screaming. The sudden, chilling lack of emotion in my tone must have penetrated his panic. "Clara, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Julian," I replied slowly, savoring every syllable. "I just followed the money. Did you really think you could frame me for the Bellevue funds and run off to St. Bart's with Evelyn?" Silence, a thick, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his rapid, shallow breathing. The realization that I knew that I had known for days, that I had smiled through dinner, served dessert, and kissed him goodbye while actively orchestrating his ruin was paralyzing him. You don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, a pathetic, desperate attempt to reclaim the gaslighting narrative. "Clara, you're having a manic episode. Tell me where you are. We need to fix the bank error." "There is no bank error, Julian," I interrupted, my voice hardening into steel. "The $3.2 million Evelyn wired this morning, along with your $800,000 in reserves, is sitting in a locked federal escrow account. It requires 2 signatures to release, mine and the SEC auditor, who is currently reviewing the whistleblower report I filed at 10:01 a.m. A sound escaped his throat. It wasn't a word. It was a wounded, guttural gasp, the sound of a man watching his life burn to the ground. "You filed a report?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Clara, you're destroying the firm. You're destroying us. You destroyed us, Julian," I said, the cold rage finally seeping into my words. "You destroyed us when you brought her into my house. You destroyed us when you brought her into my bed. You thought I was blind because I loved you. But I'm the architect who built the foundation of your entire career, and I'm the one who just pulled the pin out. Please," he begged, the arrogance completely shattered. "Clara, please, we can fix this. I'll leave her. I swear to God, I'll leave her. Just call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. If the SEC investigates, I'll go to prison." "I know," I said. "Clara," he screamed, pure terror tearing through the line. "Check the dining room table, Julian," I said quietly. "I left something for you." I hung up the phone. I didn't block his number. I turned the device off completely. I tossed it into the passenger seat, turned the key in the ignition, and pulled back onto the highway. I didn't see Julian's reaction to the letter, but Arthur, who still had deep ties within the Seattle legal and financial communities, kept me apprised of the fallout over the next few weeks. It was a spectacular, catastrophic implosion. Julian had rushed home immediately after our phone call, leaving his office in the middle of a frantic scramble as the firm's accountants began noticing the frozen accounts. He burst into the house, finding it exactly as I had left it, pristine, silent, and empty. And there, in the exact center of the mahogany dining table, was the heavy cream cardstock. Julian, I hope Evelyn enjoys the Bellevue project as much as she enjoys my perfume. The SEC has all the texts, the offshore routing numbers, and the proof of Marcus Cross's liquidated assets. I've taken my daughter, my dignity, and the firm's operating capital. You wanted me to be the scapegoat. Instead, I'm the demolition crew. Checkmate, Clara. According to the neighbors, Julian stumbled out of the house 20 minutes later, looking pale and disheveled, frantically dialing his phone. He was trying to reach Evelyn, but Evelyn, upon realizing the $3 million was trapped in escrow and the federal authorities were likely already monitoring their communications, did what any parasitic grifter would do. She vanished. She abandoned her luxury apartment in downtown Seattle, emptied her remaining personal accounts, and boarded a flight to Geneva before the SEC could freeze her passport. She left Julian holding the bag. The mastermind of the Bellevue heist was suddenly the sole, highly visible target of a massive federal fraud investigation. The subsequent weeks were a masterclass in swift, merciless justice. Because I had filed as a whistleblower and preemptively locked the stolen funds in a secure trust, the authorities immediately recognized my innocence. I was granted full immunity from the fallout of the Vance and Associates collapse. The line of credit, which Julian had so confidently planned to hang around my neck, was nullified as part of the criminal fraud inquiry. The bank couldn't touch me. Julian, however, was not so lucky. 2 days after I left, federal agents raided the offices of Vance and Associates. They confiscated the servers, the hard drives, and crucially, they searched the garage at our Mercer Island home. They found the drafting tube. They found the secret phone. Julian had been too paralyzed by panic to destroy the evidence. The texts between Julian and Evelyn provided a flawless roadmap of the conspiracy. The SEC traced the dummy invoices, the offshore LLC in the Caymans, and the timeline of Marcus Cross's suspicious asset liquidation. Julian was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. His assets were seized. His architectural license was permanently revoked. The man who had spent a decade crafting an image of untarnished brilliance was paraded out of his office in handcuffs, his bespoke suit wrinkled, his face shielded from the local news cameras. Arthur handled the dissolution of the firm. As the founding partner and the whistleblower, I was legally entitled to my initial investment, plus a significant portion of the legitimate, untainted equity that remained after the Bellevue funds were returned to the Cross estate. It wasn't the millions Julian had tried to steal, but it was enough, more than enough to start over. I filed for divorce from Portland, using a ruthless litigator Arthur recommended. Julian, sitting in a federal holding facility awaiting trial, had no leverage, no money, and no credibility. He signed the papers without a fight. I was granted full custody of Lily, and Julian was ordered to have no contact with us outside of legally mandated, supervised visitation which, given his impending prison sentence, would likely be non-existent for the foreseeable future. My mother's house in Portland became our sanctuary. It was a sprawling Victorian filled with the smell of baking bread and old wood, a stark contrast to the cold, modern sterility of the house in Mercer Island. Lily adjusted surprisingly well. Children are resilient, far more resilient than we give them credit for. She started at a new school, made new friends, and the memory of the lady from Daddy's secret phone slowly faded into the background noise of her childhood. But for me, the healing was a slower, more deliberate process. For 10 years, I had allowed my identity to be entirely consumed by Julian Vance. I had been Clara, the supportive wife, Clara, the silent partner, Clara, the perfect hostess. I had to relearn who I was when I wasn't orbiting his son. I started by reclaiming my name. I legally dropped Vance and went back to my maiden name, Clara Hayes. Then, I reclaimed my profession. 6 months after the implosion of Vance and Associates, I leased a small, sunlit studio space in the Pearl District of Portland. I bought a drafting table, a set of high-quality markers, and a fresh roll of vellum. I didn't want to build massive commercial skyscrapers or luxury mansions fueled by greed. I wanted to design spaces that felt safe, grounded, and authentic. I launched Hayes Restoration, focusing on sustainable historical renovations of older homes in the Pacific Northwest. I took on small clients at first, a kitchen remodel here, a structural reinforcement there. But my reputation, quietly bolstered by Arthur's network, began to grow. People appreciated my meticulous attention to detail, my refusal to cut corners, and the quiet, unyielding strength I brought to every project. One rainy afternoon in November, exactly a year after the dinner party that changed my life, I was sitting at my drafting table, sketching the floor plan for a 1920s craftsman bungalow. The studio was warm, smelling of cedar and fresh coffee. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Arthur. "Clara," his gravelly voice came through the speaker. "I just got off the phone with the federal prosecutor in Seattle." I set my pencil down. My heart gave a familiar but manageable flutter. "And?" "Julian took the plea deal," Arthur said. "He couldn't risk a trial with the amount of evidence they had on that phone. He pled guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy." "How long?" I asked, my voice steady. 84 months, Arthur replied. 7 years in a federal penitentiary. No chance of early parole. Evelyn Cross is still in the wind, but there's an Interpol red notice out for her. It's over, Clara. The structure is officially demolished. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the large, rain-streaked window of my studio. 7 years. Julian, the man who couldn't stand a smudge on his crystal wine glasses, was going to spend the next 7 years in a concrete cell. He had tried to build an empire on a foundation of lies, and the weight of his own arrogance had crushed him. "Thank you, Arthur," I said softly. "For everything. You did the heavy lifting, kid," he replied. "I just handed you the sledgehammer. Take care of yourself, Clara, and take care of Lily." I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a surge of triumphant joy or a crushing wave of sorrow. I just felt a profound, settling peace, the kind of peace you feel when a raging storm finally breaks, leaving the air clean and the earth solid beneath your feet. I picked up my pencil, adjusted my desk lamp, and went back to my blueprint. I was drawing the foundational supports for the craftsman home, reinforcing the load-bearing walls, ensuring the structure could withstand the heavy Pacific Northwest rains. I traced a firm, dark line across the vellum, a smile touching the corners of my mouth. I was Clara Hayes. I was an architect, and I finally knew how to build a life that couldn't be broken.